The festival organizer grabbed Jimi Hendrix by the arm as he prepared to take the stage at Woodstock. "Whatever you do," the man said urgently, "don't play the national anthem. We've had enough controversy. We can't afford any more political statements." It was 9 a.m. on Monday, August 18, 1969. Most of the 400,000 people who had gathered for the Woodstock Music and Art Fair had already gone home. The festival was supposed to end Sunday night, but delays had pushed Jimi's performance into Monday morning. What remained was a muddy field, scattered debris, and maybe 25,000 die-hard fans who had stayed to see the man they called the greatest guitarist alive. Jimi looked at the organizer, then at his guitar, then at the American flag hanging limply from a pole in the morning mist. In 18 minutes, he would play the most revolutionary version of the Star-Spangled Banner in American history. A performance that would split the country, redefine patriotism, and prove that sometimes the most powerful protest comes not from burning the flag, but from making it sing the truth about what America had become. This is the story of the morning when Jimi Hendrix changed the sound of freedom forever, and the moment when music became the voice of a generation that had been waiting for someone brave enough to play what they couldn't say. Woodstock had been planned as a celebration of peace, love, and music. But by August 1969, America was fracturing along generational, racial, and political lines. The Vietnam War was raging. Young Americans were dying in a conflict that many couldn't understand or support. The civil rights movement had revealed deep racial wounds that many white Americans didn't want to acknowledge. And the counterculture movement was challenging every assumption about what America was supposed to be. The festival organizers wanted Woodstock to be above politics, a place where music could unite people instead of dividing them. They had specifically asked performers to avoid controversial political statements. But Jimi Hendrix had been living the contradictions of American society his entire life. He was a black man who had served his country in the army, only to return to a nation that didn't treat him as an equal citizen. He was a rock star who was beloved by white audiences while facing discrimination in his daily life. He was an artist whose music spoke to the pain of his generation, but who was constantly pressured to avoid political statements. Standing on the Woodstock stage at 9 a.m., with a sparse crowd of exhausted festival-goers and a country torn apart by war and social upheaval, Jimi faced a choice that would define both his legacy and the moment when American music grew up. The festival organizers' warning had been clear: no national anthem. It was too risky, too charged, too likely to cause the kind of controversy that could overshadow the positive message Woodstock was trying to send. But as Jimi looked out at the muddy field where hundreds of thousands of young Americans had gathered to imagine a different kind of country, he realized that avoiding controversy wasn't the same thing as promoting peace. Sometimes peace requires acknowledging the war. The performance that preceded his anthem has become legendary in its own right. For nearly 2 hours, Jimi had taken his audience on a musical journey that encompassed everything from blues to rock to psychedelic experimentation. He played songs from his albums, covers of Bob Dylan, and improvised passages that seemed to channel the collective consciousness of his generation. The sparse crowd was transfixed, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. But it was when Jimi began the opening notes of the Star-Spangled Banner that the morning took on historic significance. At first, the song was recognizable, the familiar melody that every American child learns in school, played with the technical precision that had made Jimi famous around the world.
But as he continued, something began to change. The guitar began to weep, not metaphorically, but literally. Jimi's use of feedback, distortion, and bending notes made the instrument sound like it was crying. The anthem became a lament. Then came the sounds of war. Through his guitar, Jimi recreated the whistle of falling bombs, the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire, the screams of jets overhead. The anthem became the soundtrack to Vietnam, played in real time by a man who had served his country and watched it tear itself apart. The audience stood transfixed. This wasn't a protest song in any traditional sense. This was the national anthem, played exactly as it was written. But Jimi's interpretation revealed truths about America that no protest song could capture. He showed them the gap between the ideals the anthem represented and the reality of what America had become. Between the land of the free and a country that sent young men to die in foreign wars. Between the home of the brave and a nation afraid to confront its own contradictions. The performance lasted about 4 minutes, but those 4 minutes contained decades of American history, pain, hope, and disillusion. When he finished, the field was silent except for the morning wind. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not the wild cheering that usually followed rock performances, but something deeper. Recognition, understanding, the sound of people who had just witnessed something that would change how they thought about their country forever. But the real impact of Jimi's anthem wasn't felt at Woodstock itself. It was felt when the film of his performance began spreading across America in the months and years that followed. To older Americans, particularly those who supported the Vietnam War, Jimi's version was sacrilegious. They heard the feedback and distortion as disrespect, the war sounds as unpatriotic mockery. Letters poured in to television stations and newspapers condemning the performance as un-American. But to younger Americans, especially those who were fighting in Vietnam or had lost friends and family to the war, Jimi's anthem was the most honest thing they had ever heard about their country. Soldiers in Vietnam wrote letters saying that Jimi's version captured what they were experiencing better than any news report. Protesters said it expressed their love for America's ideals and their heartbreak over its failures. Civil rights activists heard in it the complex relationship between Black Americans and the country that both oppressed and inspired them. The performance split along the same lines that were splitting America itself. Conservative commentators called it an assault on American values. Liberal activists called it the most patriotic song ever performed. But perhaps the most profound response came from an unexpected source: military veterans. Within months of the Woodstock film's release, veterans groups across the country were debating the meaning of Jimi's performance. Many older veterans, particularly those who had fought in World War II, initially condemned it. But Vietnam veterans had a different reaction. "He played what we were living," wrote one veteran in a letter to Rolling Stone magazine. "The beautiful beginning, then the horror, then the question of whether the flag was still there at the end. That's exactly what Vietnam felt like." Another veteran wrote, "I was angry at first, then I realized he wasn't disrespecting the flag, he was asking the flag to live up to what it's supposed to mean." The performance became a touchstone for discussions about patriotism, protest, and the role of art in political discourse.
College professors began using it in classes about American history. Musicians studied it as an example of how instrumental music could convey complex political and emotional messages. And gradually, it became clear that Jimi had created something unprecedented, a version of the national anthem that somehow managed to be both deeply critical and deeply patriotic at the same time. In 1974, a poll conducted by Rolling Stone magazine named Jimi's Woodstock Anthem as the most important musical performance of the 1960s. In 1999, it was ranked by VH1 as one of the greatest moments in rock history. But perhaps more significantly, it changed how Americans thought about the relationship between art and patriotism. Before Woodstock, most Americans saw artistic criticism of the country as unpatriotic. After Jimi's performance, many began to understand that the deepest love of country might require the courage to acknowledge its failures. The festival organizer, who had warned Jimi not to play the anthem, later admitted that he had been wrong. "I thought I was protecting Woodstock from controversy," he said in a 1979 interview. "But Jimi taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your country is tell it the truth, even when the truth is painful." Jimi himself rarely spoke about the political meaning of his performance. When asked by reporters why he had played the anthem the way he did, he typically gave simple answers. "It's not unpatriotic," he said in one interview. "It's reality. America is beautiful, but it's also in pain. The music just reflected what I was feeling about the country at that moment." In another interview, he was more direct. "We're all Americans. We have the right to play American music any way we feel it." And that morning, America felt like it was crying. The performance has been analyzed, debated, and reinterpreted for more than 50 years. Musicians have covered it, scholars have studied it, and politicians have cited it in speeches about everything from free speech to military service. But at its core, Jimi's Woodstock anthem represents something uniquely American, the idea that true patriotism sometimes requires the courage to challenge the country you love. Standing alone on that muddy stage at 9 a.m., with most of America either asleep or heading home from work, Jimi Hendrix did something that no other artist had dared to do. He played the national anthem as if the country's life depended on people hearing what it actually sounded like. Not the sanitized version sung at baseball games, but the complex, painful, beautiful, contradictory reality of what America had become by 1969.
And in doing so, he created a moment that transcended music and became part of the national conversation about who Americans were and who they wanted to become. The irony is that by defying the festival organizers' request not to make a political statement, Jimi created the most apolitical political statement possible. He didn't advocate for any particular policy or candidate. He didn't tell people what to think or how to vote. He simply played the national anthem honestly. And sometimes honesty is the most revolutionary thing an artist can offer. 55 years later, Jimi's Woodstock performance remains a reference point for discussions about art, politics, and patriotism. Musicians still study it, political scientists still debate its meaning, and Americans on all sides of the political spectrum still find in it something that speaks to their understanding of what the country could be. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that 9 a.m. performance is the reminder that music, at its best, has the power to help us hear familiar things in new ways. Jimi took the song that every American knows by heart and revealed depths in it that most people had never considered. He showed that even the most traditional, patriotic music could contain space for questioning, for sorrow, for hope, and for the complex emotions that come with loving something that isn't perfect. Standing in that muddy field as the sun rose over Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix didn't just play the national anthem. He reimagined what it could mean to be an American artist in a time when America itself was being reimagined. And in those 4 minutes, he gave his country a gift that it's still learning how to receive: the sound of its own voice, singing the truth about itself, with all the beauty and pain that truth contains. If this story of artistic courage changing the national conversation moved you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who believes that real patriotism sometimes requires uncomfortable truths.
Have you ever witnessed a performance that changed how you thought about your country? Tell us about it in the comments. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories about the moments when music became more powerful than politics.